What if I told you that the 10 tribes of Israel never truly disappeared? That in every reading I have seen their image like seeds scattered by the wind, carried to the four corners, yet still holding their life, waiting for the day to rise again. And that very memory tells me history is never only the past, but prophecy, unfolding step by step before our eyes. I have seen the image of the United Kingdom under David and Solomon, a kingdom shining like a lamp set on a hill. Then that light dispersed, divided, and from that division emerged one of the greatest mysteries of Scripture. In visions I saw a chosen people, a covenant engraved into their very flesh, yet also a people carrying rebellion, pride, and forgetfulness. I heard the echo in their soul, the question of where they had gone, where they still existed, and whether they would return in the final hour to complete the work left unfinished. When I entered the state of reading, their image did not appear as ghosts of history, but as streams still flowing. I saw crowds leaving the land of their fathers, heavy feet, eyes fixed on the distance, and in their gaze both the pain of exile and the light of a promise that never died. I realized the 10 tribes are not simply groups erased from record, but a mirror showing that while people may lose identity, the soul never loses its root. In dreams I have seen them as stars hidden by clouds, their light not gone, only concealed, and when the clouds parted, their radiance burst forth again. So I believe they were never erased from the divine plan. Scripture calls them chosen to be a sign to the nations. But when their hearts turned from covenant, they were scattered to the ends of the earth. I saw the force of Assyria like a raging flood sweeping them away. Yet I also saw invisible threads tying them to the center of light, threads no power could sever. When asked if they had truly vanished, I can only say that in my readings, I see them still alive, hidden in distant communities, guarding fragments of ancestral memory through rituals, through abstinence, and through mysterious tongues no one can explain, from Ethiopia to India, from Afghanistan to Nigeria, from the mountains to distant coasts. Each community is a shard of the great mosaic, and when pieced together, they reveal Israel. Some may say it is coincidence of culture, that customs mirror each other by borrowing. Yet when I laid hands on such people in readings, I felt the current in their blood, a current carrying memory that cannot be denied. It is like touching a stone, still warm, knowing it once lay under the sun. So I know the 10 tribes still exist. What astonishes me is not only their survival, but the role they will play in the final chapter of humanity. I have read prophecy that they will return, that dry bones will rise again, that once more Israel will be one, no longer divided. In that light, I saw a message for all ages, that what seems lost is only hidden, awaiting revelation. When I recount this, I do not speak as a scholar or historian, but as one who has heard in the soul the flow of collective memory, as though handed an ancient recording still playing. The tribes have not vanished. They whisper through the blood of scattered peoples. And when we look back, we will see that their loss itself was part of the plan. For their return will be the sign that the covenant never died. The promise still breathes. And the path of humanity nears the chapter foretold long ago. The origin of the 12 tribes of Israel begins with Jacob, grandson of Abraham and son of Isaac, the one who wrestled through the night with the invisible one until dawn broke upon his weary form. In that struggle, he was given a new name, Israel, meaning the one who wrestled with God. From that moment, his destiny and that of his descendants entered an irreversible divine program. What happened in that night of wrestling was not merely a personal transformation, but the birth of a nation, a covenantal lineage destined to carry both blessing and burden for all humanity. I have seen in readings the image of Jacob's 12 sons, not merely as men of flesh and blood, but as streams of spiritual force, each channeling a particular attribute of the divine into history. They were like 12 rays emanating from one source, distinct yet united in origin. Each became the patriarch of a tribe, and each tribe bore a mission, inscribed within its character a portion of responsibility, a fragment of the great inheritance promised to Abraham. Together, they wove a sacred tapestry that no single tribe could fulfill alone. When I look upon them, I see Judah bearing the light of kingship, the scepter of rule, destined to remain until the Messiah comes. Benjamin, the youngest, appears as small yet steadfast, a symbol of loyalty and faithfulness even in the face of trial. Levi shines as the priestly line, the bridge between God and the people, chosen to tend to the sanctuary and to carry the ark. Joseph, blessed beyond his brothers, divided into Ephraim and Manasseh, whose names themselves signify increase and strength, the power to multiply and endure, and the others Reuben, Simeon, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun each carried a distinctive mark. Some bore might in battle, others prosperity in land, others swiftness of action or steadfast labor. Like instruments in a symphony, each played its note, and only together did they form the harmony called Israel. The division of the land under Joshua was not arbitrary, but a sacred map. It was as if the soil itself bore witness that each tribe had a place, none forgotten, none without a role in the larger design. The boundaries of their inheritance became symbols etched upon earth, declaring that God's covenant was not vague but tangible, marked by rivers, valleys, and mountains. I once saw Jacob in vision, frail upon his bed in Egypt, yet burning with prophetic fire. He called each son and spoke over him not only blessing but destiny. His words were not mere fatherly hopes, but living prophecy carved like stone into time itself. To Judah he declared the scepter would not depart until the promised one came. To Joseph he gave a blessing surpassing the others, a double portion flowing to Ephraim and Manasseh. To Dan he spoke of justice, sometimes stern, sometimes misunderstood, but carrying the weight of divine balance. Each utterance was a seed of the future, some sprouting in days, others waiting millennia to unfold. From these blessings I came to understand the 12 tribes are not only biological groups but spiritual archetypes, principles placed within history to mirror the facets of the human soul. When Israel became a united kingdom under David and Solomon, it was the brightest hour, 12 tribes together honoring the Most High, building the temple, bearing witness to the nations that their God was true. Yet even then, in the golden light of unity, I saw cracks, for each tribe carried within itself both strength and shadow. Judah's will could harden into pride, Simeon's passion into wrath, Dan's justice into severity, Ephraim's vision into arrogance. The north and south carried seeds of division. Judah in the south bore kingship. Benjamin stood by, while the 10 tribes of the north, numerous and strong, leaned toward rebellion. That difference became the spark of fracture. After Solomon, the kingdom split, and the unity of Jacob's sons dissolved into rivalry. The temple stood in Jerusalem, but altars rose in Samaria. The prophets cried out, but the ears of the tribes grew dull, and exile became the inevitable harvest. Yet in vision I saw that even dispersion was not an accident, but part of the larger design. The energies of each tribe, though scattered, did not vanish. Like seeds sown in foreign soil, they lay dormant, awaiting their season. Judah preserved kingship and the line of David. Levi carried priesthood even in exile. Dan Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, and the rest flowed into nations, leaving traces in customs, songs, and whispered memories. The covenant could not be fulfilled until all 12 were gathered again. For the body of Israel is incomplete without every part. After the time of Solomon, I saw the light fracture into two opposing realms, the kingdom of Israel no longer one body, but split like a vessel cracked from within, its unity broken, and its destiny altered. The south remained under Judah and Benjamin, holding fast to Jerusalem, where the temple stood as the visible heart of worship, while the north gathered the 10 other tribes into a kingdom of their own. This fracture was not only political, not merely the rise of two governments, but a deep wound in the soul of a people whose covenant had been built upon unity. In my readings, I saw two streams drifting apart, each carrying with it memory and promise, yet one rooted in the sanctuary of Zion, and the other moving into wilderness, seeking other altars. The north, fearing that their people would return south for worship, built high places in Samaria and Bethel. They raised golden images, claiming these calves represented the God who brought their fathers out of Egypt. But the vision revealed otherwise. Their loyalty was given not to the living God, but to lifeless shapes. I saw crowds gather with fervent joy, singing and offering sacrifice, believing they still honored the covenant. Yet in truth, they had exchanged the spring of living water for dry cisterns that held nothing. The prophets cried out, Amos, thundering of justice. Hosea, pleading with love. Elijah calling fire from heaven to awaken hearts, but the ears of the north were closed. Their hearts hardened, and their steps carried them deeper into idolatry and rebellion. I saw their souls in vision as thirsty wanderers, drinking from cracked wells that gave no water, lips parched, yet refusing the fountain waiting for them. That thirst drove them further and further, until covenant was only a faint echo. This division carried consequence, for covenant was made to preserve unity. And when unity is broken, the threads of blessing unravel. What began as separation soon became scattering. I saw the hand of Assyria like a storm cloud gathering in the north, its winds fierce, its armies relentless. The 10 tribes could not stand. The walls fell. The gates opened. The people were carried away, like leaves in a storm. The year 722 BC burned in my vision as the mark of one of history's greatest disappearances. Villages emptied, families torn apart, children led in chains, elders stumbling along the roads of exile. They were driven to Halah, Habor, the mountains of Media, the cities of Assyria, dispersed among peoples who knew not their God. There, names changed, tongues shifted, customs faded. To the eye of history they vanished, absorbed into nations, dissolved into the sands of time. But with the eyes of the soul, I knew it was not erasure, but planting, not destruction, but preparation. For their scattering placed seeds of Israel among the nations, seeds that even in hidden soil would one day sprout when the appointed hour of gathering came. I saw them led away with tears, yet among them souls carried a hidden flame. In faraway houses they lit lamps on the 7th day without knowing why. In strange villages they circumcised their sons on the 8th day because the practice was burned into memory deeper than words. In markets they avoided certain foods, though no priest taught them. These were sparks in the dark night of exile, tiny embers of Sinai that refused to die. I remember in one reading I beheld a family in the land of captivity. The father lifted his hands at dusk. The mother whispered an ancient blessing in a tongue mixed with foreign words. The children stared into the flame of a small lamp, though they thought themselves forgotten. In their hearts still pulsed the rhythm of their ancestors. And in that rhythm, I heard the voice of the covenant saying, I will never forget you. Thus the 10 northern tribes disappeared from history's record, but not from the memory of the soul. The world calls them lost. But in vision I saw them as stars, hidden by clouds, their light never extinguished, only concealed. To men they seemed vanished, but to God they remained as present as ever, marked upon his palm. And I understood that this division of the kingdom was not only about Israel, but a lesson for all nations, proof that no prosperity endures when the heart turns from its source. What happened to them was a mirror for humanity itself. Every time pride replaces humility, every time idols replace the living God, unity crumbles and exile follows. Each time I read this memory, I saw the division not as an ending, but as the beginning of a greater mystery, the mystery of where the tribes wandered, into what peoples they blended, and how they will be called again in the last days. In one vision I saw a great tree struck by a storm. One half stood rooted in soil, battered yet alive, while broken branches were carried by the wind across valleys and mountains. Yet even those broken branches held sap. Where they landed, they took root anew, small trees in strange lands, waiting for the day when the gardener would gather them back into one orchard. That is the image of the 10 tribes, scattered yet alive, their sap flowing still, their roots hidden but not severed. History names it the fall of the northern kingdom, the tragedy of a nation lost, but in my soul I saw it differently. It was the beginning of a great journey, a scattering destined to become testimony, for God never abandons his people, no matter how far they run. Their scattering, though born of rebellion, will in the end stand as living evidence when the final gathering comes. When tribes are named again one by one, emerging from every horizon, speaking every tongue, yet answering to one call, then Judah will embrace Ephraim, Levi will stand with Simeon, Dan will walk beside Naphtali, Gad and Asher and Issachar and Zebulun will return, and the division once carved by sin will be healed by grace. And I saw that unity as unbreakable, for it will not be built by men but by the Messiah, who gathers all fragments into one flame. And the great division that once scattered the tribes will become the great testimony that nothing God plants can ever be destroyed, only hidden until the appointed time of return. The world calls them the 10 lost tribes. Yet in vision I have never seen them as lost, but only hidden, like seeds carried by the wind from their homeland, buried under foreign soil, forgotten by chronicles, yet never dead, still breathing in the secret chambers of soul memory. Their disappearance from the record was not an erasure, but a veiling, a stage in the divine plan, where they were scattered like sparks across the earth, each falling into new nations, new tongues, new garments, yet carrying within the rhythm of the covenant that cannot be erased by time or exile. When I touched their souls in readings, I discerned faint but undeniable traces, families that circumcised on the 8th day, though they knew not why, villages that lit lamps at dusk on the day of rest, communities that abstained from unclean food, though they thought it custom rather than command. And in these fragments I recognized embers of the fire of Sinai, glowing silently through centuries, proof that the tribes did not vanish, but awaited the breath that would awaken them again. In dreams, I saw wandering men and women, their outward form shaped by foreign lands, their songs sung in other tongues. Yet deep in their melody, I heard the ancient cadence of Israel. I understood then that disappearance was never true, loss, but transformation, the way rivers vanish beneath the ground, only to rise again stronger, carrying with them the purity of hidden depths. What the world called extinction was in truth a secret preservation. I saw how history recorded them as broken branches, swept into oblivion. But in the spirit I beheld those branches planted anew, in distant soils, Ethiopia, where Beta Israel claimed descent from Dan, India's coast where the Bene Israel remembered shipwrecked ancestors, the mountains of Afghanistan where the Pashtun named themselves Bani Israel, Nigeria where the Igbo traced their fathers to Gad and Zebulun, Zimbabwe and South Africa where the Lemba guarded priestly laws of Levi. Each one was a shard of the greater whole, fragments scattered yet luminous, and together they revealed that the 10 tribes were never lost but dispersed, like beams of one light refracted through history's prism. In vision I beheld a great river, dividing into 10 streams, each winding away into unknown lands, merging with other waters, vanishing to the eye, yet all destined to flow back into one vast sea. And I knew this was their destiny, dispersion only for a time, reunion as the final end, the gathering from the 4 corners spoken by prophets. Their disappearance was both warning and promise, warning that disobedience brings scattering, promise that even scattering bends to divine purpose. For their return will blaze with a radiance greater than their former unity. Just as stars shine brighter against the darkness of night, I saw that only through losing is finding truly valued, only through dispersion is reunion understood, only through exile does home burn brighter in the heart. Thus the 10 tribes are not gone, but written into the secret design, waiting for the voice that will call them from every coast and mountain, fitting each fragment back into its place until the whole is complete. Their apparent disappearance was but the sowing of seeds, their silence the gestation of a greater revelation yet to unfold. In my readings I beheld visions of distant villages, where mothers hummed lullabies that carried a cadence echoing Hebrew psalms, though the words were forgotten. I saw fathers who blessed bread and wine with gestures, whose meaning had slipped from memory, yet whose origin was Sinai's covenant. I saw communities who guarded strange dietary customs with no scripture to explain them, and in each one the hidden covenant pulsed like a secret heartbeat. The world passed them by, calling them superstitious or peculiar, but I knew these were fragments of Israel's ancient melody woven into humanity's great song. And I saw too that their disappearance carried within it a message for every generation. For exile is not only the story of tribes, but the condition of the human soul. Each person knows what it means to be scattered, scattered by loss, by failure, by sin, by the weight of time, and yet the story of the lost tribes teaches that dispersion is never the final word. Just as sparks carried by wind still glow and may ignite again, so the human soul, even in its wandering, retains within it the covenantal spark, awaiting the breath of God to kindle it once more. The prophet spoke of a day when God would gather his children from the ends of the earth, a vision so vast that it seemed beyond imagination. Yet in seeing the scattered remnants of the tribes, I realized this promise is not a metaphor, but a destiny. The gathering will not only be of bloodlines, but of souls, of all who carry within themselves the seed of faith, whether remembered or forgotten. The lost tribes are the pattern, the echo, the foreshadowing of a greater homecoming that will embrace all peoples. Thus I say again, what the world calls lost has only been hidden, and what is hidden will be revealed at the appointed hour. Their story is a testimony that covenant cannot die, that identity may sleep but never perish, that history itself is a veil through which God's hand writes mysteries unseen. When the spring of return arrives, the seeds long buried shall break forth, and the tribes once scattered shall stand again, radiant with the fire of their origin. The disappearance of the 10 tribes is not tragedy but prophecy. It is the silence before the song, the winter before the bloom, the scattering before the gathering. It is the mystery by which God teaches that his promises may tarry but never fail, that his covenant may seem hidden but is never broken. For what was sown in exile shall be reaped in glory, and the world will see that nothing God plants can ever be truly lost. In Africa, I saw the image of a community little known to many, yet in my readings they appeared clearly as a remnant witness of the tribe of Dan. They call themselves Beta Israel. In each soul I touched, I saw their strict keeping of the Sabbath, their circumcising of sons on the 8th day, their abstaining from unclean foods, and their festivals carrying the tones of ancient Israel, even after centuries of isolation. They were like a small lamp kept burning in the vast land of Ethiopia, its flame seeming faint, yet never extinguished, passed from generation to generation as an imperishable inheritance. When I laid my hand on one among them, I sensed in their blood the stream of Dan. I saw their ancestors leaving Israel, passing through Egypt, and settling in East Africa, becoming a forgotten branch, yet never lost. In their memory, they still tell of origins. In their rituals, they still hold reverence. And this itself is proof that the 10 tribes never truly disappeared. Though historians may debate their exact lineage, the living faith they preserved testifies to an unbroken chain that cannot be dismissed. They carried the covenant in their very bodies, inscribed, not on parchment alone, but on their habits, choices, and rhythm of life. I recall clearly that in the late 20th century, when the State of Israel launched Operations Moses and Solomon to bring tens of thousands of Beta Israel back to the Promised Land, in my readings I saw this not merely as a political or humanitarian act, but as a prophetic echo. It was as if the ancient promise of gathering Israel's children from the 4 corners of the earth was being fulfilled before our eyes. I saw planes taking off, carrying them to Jerusalem, and in their eyes was faith that after centuries of separation, they had finally returned. The joy written upon their faces was not only the relief of rescue, but the recognition that prophecy had breathed life into their journey. This confirmed to me that God had never forgotten his covenant. Some may doubt, saying they are but an isolated Jewish branch. Yet in my soul I know they are descendants of Dan. I heard the whisper of their ancestors saying, "We were kept to prove prophecy true. We are the living testimony that dispersion does not mean destruction." Their presence became a piece in the great puzzle of the lost tribes slowly revealed, a hidden thread woven into history that now emerges to remind the world of God's unshakable plan. Once in vision, I saw a group of Beta Israel walking through the desert carrying an old scroll, their eyes fixed northward, and I heard within a voice echoing, "One day we will be called back." Centuries later, that voice was fulfilled. Their return is not only the story of one people, but a signal to all humanity that God's plan still continues. What was written is not myth, but unfolding destiny. The dry bones spoken of by the prophet Ezekiel live again when we witness such restoration. In my readings, I also saw their journey not only as history, but as symbol, for they mirror the human soul itself. When roots are lost, one can still guard the inner light. Even if forgotten by the world, one is never forgotten by God. At the appointed time, that hidden flame shines again. Beta Israel embodies this principle. Their story teaches that no loss is hopeless. Every dispersion holds a promise of return, and no exile is beyond the reach of divine remembrance. When I connected with these souls, I saw them not weak as many might imagine, but carrying a resilient inner strength. It was this hidden strength that preserved them through millennia of isolation, that gave them courage to resist assimilation, that sustained their rituals under foreign eyes, and that finally carried them back to their origin, their Sabbath fires, their prayers uttered in Ge'ez and Hebrew, their ancient chants. All were like rivers flowing underground, unseen yet constant, until at last they surfaced once more in Jerusalem. I know their return is a reminder that the other tribes too will one day come back, for if Dan survived and returned, then no tribe is completely lost. The covenant was not written for one generation, but for all generations. And if God's promise could preserve a people hidden in the mountains of Ethiopia for centuries, then he can also preserve those scattered across lands and nations, waiting for the appointed time of return. That is why I regard Beta Israel as a sign. They are a living proof that prophecy in Scripture is not mere words, but unfolding events in history, partly fulfilled already and the rest waiting to be revealed. Ethiopia, in its hidden follies, preserved a testimony that now speaks loudly to the world. The God of Israel does not forget. What was dispersed will be gathered, what was scattered will be restored, and what seemed lost will be found again. Even more, their existence whispers to the soul of every person. For are we not all exiles in some form, wandering far from our original garden, longing for home? In Beta Israel's return lies a message for humanity itself. If God remembers them, he will remember us. If he gathers them, he will gather us. If he restores their heritage, he will restore the light within us that we thought was extinguished. Thus Ethiopia becomes more than a geographical location. It becomes a mirror for the mystery of redemption. Beta Israel is not only the echo of the tribe of Dan, but also the echo of the human condition, dispersed yet not destroyed, forgotten by men yet remembered by God, hidden but destined to be revealed. Their testimony is both historical and prophetic, earthly and spiritual, pointing to the greater gathering still to come, when all tribes, all peoples, all souls who carry the covenant in hidden ways will return to the one who never forgets. In India, I saw the image of a small community living along the western coast, and yet in my readings they appeared not as an isolated group, but as a thread stretched across centuries into the present. They call themselves Bene Israel, and their way of life holds fragments of an ancient memory. They keep the Sabbath circumcised, their children abstain from unclean meats, and tell the story that their ancestors were once shipwrecked on the Indian coast centuries ago, drifting far from the land of their fathers, but never letting the flame go out in the soul. Record, I saw ships filled with Israelites, swept from the Mediterranean by storm, carried eastward into a strange land from which a tribe was cut off, yet chosen to keep the fire within. They believed themselves to be the children of Ephraim, son of Joseph. And when I looked into their eyes, I saw the endurance of souls, carrying both the special blessing and the heavy burden of exile. They lived apart from other Indian communities, not separated by walls or politics, but by a sacred identity that would not let them blend fully. In my inner vision, I saw families dwelling in humble clay houses, lighting lamps on Friday evenings, teaching children prayers, whose meaning they no longer fully understood. Yet, even in their half-remembered words, I heard the cadence of ancient Israel, a rhythm carried across oceans and centuries, echoing faint yet clear in remote corners of the earth. I heard the ancestors whisper, Ephraim has never been lost, only carried, afar to sow seed in a new land. And indeed I saw that seed sprout into a faithful community whose very survival testified to divine providence. Separated for centuries from the wider body of Judaism, they still preserved identity. And this was no accident. It was the fulfillment of God's promise that none of his people would be erased from the earth. Once in trance, I saw a vision of Bene Israel standing on a storm-beaten shore. The wind roared, the waves struck, but they held fast, together gripping a torn scroll, reciting ancient prayers as though even the storm must bow to listen. That image became, for me, the symbol of Ephraim, survivor of the sea, keeper of the hidden fire in the storm. And that is why they endure to this day. When the modern state of Israel was established, some among the Bene Israel migrated there, and in their return I recognized prophecy being fulfilled. For Ephraim was promised to become a multitude greater than the tribes, and their presence in Israel today is proof that the promise still breathes. I came to understand that Bene Israel are not only a community of history, but a metaphor for the human soul itself. For when a soul is swept far from its roots into foreign lands, it may still endure and preserve its true identity if it guards the inner flame. Their existence is a living parable that no circumstance, however harsh, can erase the covenant written deep within the heart. In many readings, I heard the echo that the scattering of the 10 tribes was not for the destruction, but for their sowing, like seeds hidden in the earth, so that in the end they would rise together as one great field. The Bene Israel are among the first witnesses of this truth. Their presence declares that the 10 tribes still exist, that their gathering is sure, and that God has never once forgotten his covenant with Israel. They are a testimony that exile cannot undo destiny, that storms cannot extinguish fire, and that across the longest distances, the Word of God keeps its rhythm beating faithfully in the soul. In Afghanistan and Pakistan, I saw the image of a people numbering tens of millions, yet in my readings they appeared not merely as another nation among the mountains, but as fragments still glowing from the house of Ephraim and Manasseh. They call themselves Pashtun or Pathan. Yet within the deep strata of their memory, they still whisper the name Bani Israel, children of Israel. And that whisper has survived empires, invasions, and centuries of exile in their collective soul. I heard stories told from elder to child around mountain fires, stories of forefathers who came from a far western land, chosen once but cast out and scattered, and when I fixed my inner sight upon them, I saw clearly the resemblance to the lost northern tribes. They circumcise their sons on the 8th day, they refuse pork, they keep rituals of purity and honor codes that cannot be explained as mere coincidence. These are not borrowed customs, but living embers of an ancient covenant, and their endurance proves that the fire of Israel has never been extinguished in them. I looked into the eyes of Pashtun, men hardened by war and mountain life, and saw a fierce pride, a refusal to be broken, and it reminded me of Joseph, their ancestor, who in Egypt stood firm and faithful despite exile and humiliation. His sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, inherited that same strength, and I saw it shining still in these descendants who thrive in the harsh wilderness of the Hindu Kush. Once in vision, I beheld a circle of Pashtun elders gathered by fire under the cold night sky, telling children the tale of their origin, a tale repeated like a red thread across centuries, and in their words I caught echoes of names long preserved: Reuben, Levi, Joseph, words that should have vanished in an Islamic world. Yet here they still resound like bells in the soul, testifying that memory cannot be erased by conquest or religion. I understood then that the scattering of Ephraim and Manasseh was never an accident of history, but part of a design, that they should be sown in far places like seed carried by the wind, and that one day the divine hand will gather them again from the ends of the earth. When I turned my inner sight upon them, I knew the Pashtun are a vital piece of that gathering. Scholars may debate, historians may dismiss, but when I touched their soul in prayer, I felt the same ancient rhythm, the pulse I had sensed in other remnants of Israel, a rhythm carved into the heart. Since Jacob blessed his sons, I saw in them a strange duality they carry. Islamic culture outwardly, yet within their customs, remain marks of Israel undeniable. And I understood this as evidence that assimilation cannot erase destiny, for the soul keeps covenant, even when the mind forgets. In one vision, I saw a Pashtun caravan winding through the rugged mountains, their camels burdened with cloth, and among their goods were banners stitched crudely with the six-pointed star, not as fashion, but as unconscious memory, rising from the deep, reminding them of their origin. I saw then that Pashtun are not only blood descendants of Ephraim and Manasseh, but also symbols of the unbreakable endurance of Israel. For if they can survive centuries of exile, invasion, and endless war, and yet keep identity alive, then Israel as a whole can never be erased. This is the living witness that God still keeps his promise. In another reading, I saw their return, not as a violent army, but as a great spiritual awakening. I saw them realizing that the practices preserved in stubborn secrecy, circumcision, purity codes, food laws are not mere tradition, but cords that tie them to the house of their fathers. That realization will ignite a flame and lead them to reunion with their brethren among the tribes. Then prophecy will be fulfilled in its fullness. I beheld the Pashtun people as a sea, vast and restless, waiting only for the appointed wind. When the wind of the last days blows, that sea will move not by sword but by spirit, and their awakening will be among the clearest signs that the final gathering is at hand, for they are a people of destiny, written in the scroll of time, carrying in their veins the heritage of Joseph's sons, and in their endurance the proof that Israel, though scattered, has never been forgotten. In Africa, I saw two communities carrying living marks of Israel, the Igbo of Nigeria and the Lemba of Zimbabwe and South Africa, and in them I recognized more than cultural preservation. I felt the pulse of covenant running through blood and memory. The Igbo tell of descent from Gad and Zebulun, and when I looked at their customs, the echo was unmistakable. They circumcise on the 8th day. They hold to dietary boundaries close to Torah. They celebrate festivals that mirror ancient feasts. They practice forms of sacrifice, recalling the temple days. And in their eyes, I read the unbroken certainty that they are not cut off from Israel, though centuries of exile wrap them in silence. I heard their story of ancestors who wandered south from the north, reaching West Africa, and that thread of exile woven into their oral memory resonated deeply with the history of the 10 tribes. In readings, I felt a strong vibration of ancient promise still alive within them, and I saw that many in the Igbo community are awakening, returning by choice to Judaism, learning Hebrew, praying in the Israelite way, even longing to stand again in the land of their forefathers. This was not nostalgia, but an awakening, a recognition that their identity was never lost, only buried and now uncovered. Then I saw the Lemba among the hills of Zimbabwe and South Africa, a people who tell of ancestors from a far northern land, of priestly bloodlines carried with them, and in their lives I found those traditions still intact. They circumcise, they abstain from pork, they honor the Sabbath day of rest. What startled me most was that science itself bore witness. Genetic studies revealed in many Lemba the Cohen modal haplotype, a marker of the priestly seed of Aaron. It was as if thunder confirmed what their oral memory had always carried, that their story was not myth, but truth inscribed in the body itself. In vision, I understood them as a remnant of Levi, a priestly lamp preserved against all odds in a distant land, kept as proof that even the sacred seed of priesthood was not permitted by God to be lost. I saw the Igbo and the Lemba as two lamps shining across Africa, one carrying the northern tribal memory, the other bearing the priestly line, and both declaring to the world that dispersion cannot erase covenant. Scholars may dismiss them, critics may call it coincidence, but when I touched their spirit, I felt the same heartbeat as in other scattered Israelite remnants, a rhythm that belongs not to culture or geography, but to the covenant sworn to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, a rhythm impossible to counterfeit. In the light of vision, I knew their story will not end with mere survival of customs, for in the appointed time they will awaken further, hearing the call from the center of Israel and rising to unite with their brothers. And their return will be woven into the great prophecy of gathering from the four corners of the earth. I came to see that their existence is not only historical testimony, but also a parable for all humanity. For however far a soul is scattered, if it carries covenant, it cannot be extinguished, but waits for the season of awakening when it will rise again. And so I regard the Igbo and the Lemba not as isolated anomalies, but as signs blazing before us that God's promise has not failed, that exile has not erased identity, and that the final chapter of return is near, when all the scattered sparks will gather into one great flame, and the covenant will stand revealed in fullness. I saw in visions that the prophecy of the return of the 10 tribes has never been a vague symbol, but a reality gradually unfolding. And I saw the image of Ezekiel standing in the valley of dry bones, hearing the Lord declare that those bones would live again, that the Spirit would breathe into them, and they would stand as a vast army. And in my readings, I understood that this was not only about personal restoration, but also about the revival of all Israel. The tribes thought lost would be called by name and gathered together. And I heard the promise that a day would come when Israel would no longer be divided into 2 kingdoms, but would become one people under one king. and in my soul I knew this was a sign that the final chapter of humanity is near. I also heard the echo of Isaiah declaring that the Lord will raise a banner for the nations and gather his people from the four corners, not only from Babylon, but from every place they were scattered. And in the light of my readings, I saw groups from Africa, Asia, India, and the Middle East, all turning toward one direction, like rivers flowing into a great sea. And I knew this was a global event, not merely the homecoming of a small community, for the covenant was never a narrow promise to one land, but a design written for the whole earth. And the return of the tribes is the unveiling of that design. I saw in the Spirit that the earth itself longed for this restoration, as if mountains and valleys were waiting for the steps of the tribes, returning home. I opened myself to the voice of revelation and saw the image of 144,000 sealed, 12,000 from each tribe, and I knew this meant not one tribe is forgotten. Even those called lost still have their names recorded, and this proves God never allows any part of his covenant to vanish. I saw that this return is not only physical but also spiritual, that Israel will not only return to the land but to its sacred identity. The scattering has taught them that nothing can replace unity in covenant, and the return will be a unity no longer breakable. I also knew this prophecy speaks not only to Israel but to every soul. That which seemed lost can be found again. God can breathe his Spirit into dry bones, and they will live again, reminding us that no soul is beyond hope. Every scattering is part of a plan that will end in glorious return, and no exile is so deep that the hand of God cannot reach it. In one vision I saw communities like Beta Israel, Bene Israel, Pashtun, Igbo, and Lemba all appearing as pieces of a puzzle being assembled, and when the pieces fit, the picture of the 12 tribes was complete. Then the light of Israel shone for the nations, and I knew this is the sign of the coming of the Messiah, for the gathering of Israel is always tied to the revealing of the promised king. And as the tribes return, the world will recognize the one who sits on the throne. I heard clearly that this return will not be achieved by the strength, but by the act of God. He will use events, history, and even the upheavals of the world to bring them together. And in my reading, I knew the promise is certain, and what is happening today is only the beginning of its full fulfillment. In the visions I was shown wars, migrations, and shifts of empires, but through them all the hidden thread of God's hand guided the remnants like a shepherd gathering scattered sheep. I saw angels marking those who belong to him and carrying their names into the heavenly record so that none would be erased. When I listened deeper, I heard the echo of the covenant with Abraham that his seed would be like the stars of heaven and the sand on the shore, and I realized that the lost tribes, though unseen, still multiply hidden among nations, waiting for the trumpet call to reveal them again. The dry bones will rise not as scattered fragments, but as a body restored and filled with breath, and I understood that the Spirit of God is the only force capable of such a miracle. In the silence of prayer, I felt that this prophecy is also written in every heart for each of us, carries places where bones feel dry, where hope is gone, and where identity seems lost. And the same Spirit that will gather Israel can breathe life into those places too. The vision is both cosmic and intimate, speaking to nations and to souls. I saw that when the tribes return, it will signal not only the restoration of Israel, but the renewal of the world, for the nations will see in it the proof that God's word never fails and that his covenant is eternal. The final image in my reading was of a great assembly where tribes from every corner stood together as one, holding banners inscribed with their ancient names, and at the center stood the Messiah, shining with light greater than the sun. And I knew the return is the prelude to his reign and the fulfillment of all prophecy. This is why the dry bones must stir, for they are not only symbols, but the living testimony that what God has promised, he will surely accomplish. And the gathering of the tribes is the key that unlocks the age to come. When I look back over the whole journey of the 12 tribes, from the moment Jacob received the new name Israel to the time the northern tribes disappeared into history, I feel a red thread weaving through all of it, not merely as a history of a single nation, but as the mirror of the human soul itself. For unity has always brought light and division, always brought darkness, yet even in the deepest darkness there has been a hidden promise of return, and that promise has kept them alive for thousands of years. In my readings, I saw Beta Israel guarding the flame of Dan in Africa. I saw Bene Israel by the Indian coast preserving the breath of Ephraim. I saw the Pashtun in the Hindu Kush mountains carrying the memory of Joseph. I saw the Igbo and the Lemba proving that Africa too has hidden tribes. Each community stood before me as a living testimony that no part of Israel is truly lost, but scattered like seed across the earth, awaiting the time of gathering. And as I reflected, I realized the prophecy of return is not only for them, but for all of us. For each soul carries lost fragments scattered by fear, sin, betrayal, and forgetfulness. The long journey of the 10 tribes mirrors the inner journey of every heart, showing that what seemed buried can be recovered again, if only the light of God breathes into us and revives what has died. I heard Ezekiel's voice rising across the ages, declaring that dry bones shall live again. And I knew in my heart that this vision is not only about Israel, but about every weary soul. For no death is final, and no scattering is hopeless. Once the Spirit breathes into what is broken, everything can rise again. When I looked toward the horizon of the end, I saw a new Israel restored and united, never to be divided again. And in that vision, I also saw a new humanity, where all nations are invited into the covenant, where the light of the Messiah shines, without limit, where there is no more near and far, no more lost and found, for all have come home. At that moment, I understood the greatest lesson is not simply in tracing where the tribes wandered, but in realizing that God has never forgotten even one of them. And if He has not forgotten them, He has not forgotten any of us. However far we stray, however deeply we are buried under layers of culture, memory, and exile, the true identity He planted in us remains waiting to be called back. I saw that even brokenness is not wasted, but part of a design, a preparation for greater light that comes later. And I recognize that the crystallization of this awareness is the true comfort. No losses forever, no exile without return, no covenant ever erased. The deepest echo I carry is the certainty that the covenant of God cannot be broken. It outlasts empires, it survives wars, it endures through exile. It is stronger than the march of human history. And one day, when the 12 tribes stand together under one king, we will see with unveiled eyes that every wandering, every division, every tear, every century of silence was only preparing the earth for that glorious moment when covenant and promise are fulfilled and the scattered are gathered and the human story itself is brought into its long-awaited restoration.